God and Science by John W. Dawley. Copyrighted by the John W. Dawley Trust. Narrated by Michael Drew. Chapter 14. The Crossing of Jordan. The books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are much concerned with the journey of the Israelites through the wilderness, and with a multiplicity of laws and religious rites, many of which have their place as symbols in the scriptural system of metaphysics. But the author does not propose, in this book, to embark on a detailed consideration of the wanderings of the children of Israel through the desert, and of the manifold ways in which their experiences are used by prophetic writers to illustrate the divine system. Some day, when, as Steinmetz foresaw, the scientists of the world turn their laboratories over to the study of God and prayer, numberless books will be written, examining in great detail the spiritual and essentially scientific implications of the Hexateuch as a whole. No survey of this period, however, would be complete without a consideration of the story of the crossing of the Jordan, and all that this experience symbolized in the development of the spiritual idea in its eternal appearing to mankind. The respective missions of Moses and Joshua. The children of Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, according to the scriptural record, although they had the opportunity of entering the promised land much sooner than they did. After only 2 years of wandering, they arrived at Kadesh Barnea, where Moses sent out 12 spies into the land of Canaan to report on it, believing that the people would be prepared to go up immediately and possess it. Indeed, Caleb, one of the spies, on returning to the camp, urged Moses and the Israelites to do so. Caleb was of the tribe of Judah, out of which Jesus Christ came. The Christ idea is ever urging us to inherit the promised land. But often, like the children of Israel, we fear the conflict involved, and either through lack of moral courage or through insufficient vision we do not seize our opportunity, and thus we condemn ourselves to remain in the desert much longer than is necessary. 38 years more did the children of Israel have to wander, until at length they reached the bank of the Jordan. The crossing of the Red Sea, led by Moses, had marked the passage from Egypt into the wilderness. The crossing of the Jordan, led by Joshua, marked the passage from the wilderness into the promised land. Moses had brought his people out of the darkness of Egypt, or materiality, into the wilderness of human experience, where he educated them spiritually. Then, as their thought became increasingly enlightened concerning the things of God, Joshua was able to take them on still further, and to identify them more closely with their ideal. The death of Moses and the ascension of Joshua to the position of leader of the Israelites is related as follows. And Moses went up from the plains of Moab unto the mountain of Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, that is over against Jericho. And the Lord said unto him, This is the land which I swear unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, saying, I will give it unto thy seed. I have caused thee to see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not go over thither. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. And Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him. And the children of Israel hearkened unto him, and did as the Lord commanded Moses. And there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, in all the signs and the wonders, which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh, and to all his servants, and to all his land, and in all that mighty hand, and in all the great terror which Moses showed in the sight of all Israel. Deuteronomy 34:1, 4, 5, 7, and 9 through 12. There are many opinions as to why Moses was not permitted to go into the land of Canaan, and indeed the question has always been a difficult one to answer. Either the supremacy and reality of the spiritual had so developed in Moses' thought and vision that the inheritance of a merely physical promised land in Canaan would have been for him a backward step, just as a continuation of mortal life would have been a backward step for Jesus when his vision had progressed beyond mortality. Or, on the other hand, Moses' concept of God as Yahweh, the Israelitish God of war, may have been only sufficient to carry him and his mission so far and no further. The name Moses was derived from the Hebrew verb meaning draw out, whilst Joshua means saviour. Moses' mission was mainly concerned with drawing the Israelites out of bondage, bringing them out of their belief in myriad false gods, and establishing for them, insofar as he could, a definite understanding of the one God. This was an enormous undertaking, as most pioneer work tends to be. Joshua, on the other hand, had the task of continuing and consolidating all that Moses had accomplished in the way of spiritual teaching, and thus preserving the newly awakened sense of true identity with God, which the Israelites were beginning to accept and prove to some extent. The place of the book of Joshua in Israel's history. In considering the crossing of the Jordan, it would be well to remember certain points in connection with the book of Joshua, which records it. Peake's commentary on the Bible states, "On looking back over the book of Joshua, the student will probably experience a feeling of disappointment. According to critical investigation, the book appears to be a medley of contradictory narratives, most of which are unhistorical. It has to be admitted that the Hebrew writers knew nothing of history in the modern sense of the term. Myth, legend, tradition were all accepted without question. But on the other hand they believed, and that rightly, that the destiny of their nation was one of great importance in the history of the world. And the book of Joshua was written and edited in the belief that events contributory to the realization of that destiny are to be seen in the conquest and occupation of Palestine. The traditional and legendary accounts of these events were narrated in all good faith by the aid of the only materials then available. Such considerations as these will always render the investigation of the obscure history of early Israel a subject of abiding interest to modern students of religion. In the great epic of Israel's history, the book of Joshua has its place. The whole incident of the entry into the land of Canaan is so vague and traditional that Sir Flinders Petrie, the eminent Egyptologist, has even suggested that the invaders of Canaan were the descendants of the Hyksos people, who had reigned over Egypt for some centuries and had been driven out. Whether this is so or not, no one knows. But the fact that such an authority should put forward this suggestion shows the uncertainty of the biblical record of the Israelites' entry into Canaan. Again, of course, it must not be forgotten that this record was probably written 1,000 years after the incident was supposed to have taken place, and was used by the prophetic writers to symbolize and illustrate spiritual and ethical values. Comparison with the crossing of the Red Sea. An illuminating comparison can be made between the records of the crossing of the Red Sea and of the Jordan. In the case of the first, the Hebrews were supposed to be fleeing from the Egyptians, who were hot in pursuit, and they were forced to cross the sea in order to be saved. At the Jordan, the approaching land was first examined by 2 men. The whole passage was then thought out in an ordered way, and also it took place after a willing decision to undertake it. The Jordan was not crossed with doubt, trepidation, and fear, but with a sense of power, authority, and dominion. The appearance of the number 12 throughout this account, therefore, is very marked, for it will be remembered that this number is used in the biblical record as a symbol of true government or authority, and of proof or demonstration of the divine nature. Moreover, the important point about this passage seems to be that the Ark of the Covenant, that ark which contained the 2 tables of stone, was to go before the people, signifying that the growing understanding of the Word of God and the Christ translation was leading them forward to an even higher sense of the Christ idea, the promised land itself. It becomes more and more evident, in fact, that the developing idea of God had left the swaddling clothes of the Word, the seeking process, and was now being firmly established and identified as the appearing, in some measure, of the Christ, the finding process. Truly, the dry land was bringing forth grass, herb, and fruit tree bearing fruit. The passage of Jordan. In chapter 3, the story is told of the passage of Jordan. And Joshua said, Hereby ye shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Hivites, and the Perizzites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all of the earth passeth over before you into Jordan. Now therefore take you 12 men out of the tribes of Israel, out of every tribe a man. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand upon an heap. And it came to pass, when the people removed from their tents to pass over Jordan, and the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as they that bear the ark were come unto Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest, that the waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon an heap, very far from the city Adam, that is beside Zaratan, and those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed, and were cut off. And the people passed over right against Jericho. And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan, and all the Israelites passed over on dry ground, until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. Joshua 3:10-17. Again, the question of the historicity of this event, although interesting, cannot be compared in importance with its spiritual value as an inspired symbol to depict the fact that when the individual has attained to some measure of understanding of the Christ, the ideal of the infinite, then the waters, the element of mortal thought in every human experience, can always be dealt with definitely, scientifically, and with authority and power. In reading this account in Joshua, one hears echoes of the story of the flood and Noah's Ark, and of course of the crossing of the Red Sea. In the story of the flood, the waters, the elements of the carnal mind, abated. In the story of the Red Sea, the waters were divided. But at Jordan, the waters failed and were cut off. These were 3 similar events, but they were used by the prophetic writers to depict different aspects of the infinite categories of divine metaphysics and their dynamic operation in human experience. When the Red Sea had to be crossed, it was with a fearful and perplexed state of thought, for although the way was definite as far as Moses was concerned, the people of Israel were hesitant and afraid. Since that time, however, they had been through the wilderness, where they had learned something of the divine calculus of ideas, and had proved systematically and scientifically God's presence and power on many occasions. They had identified themselves with this divine presence and power. Hence, in this 3,000 years of Bible history, the third day of creation, defining the nature of God as the one divine identity, or soul, and all that this term conveys, was becoming a definite and inspired numeral of spiritual thought to them, and was translating to them, in a degree, the Christ idea. Jordan was crossed after the Israelites had obeyed Joshua's command to sanctify themselves. It was crossed not with fear and hesitancy, but with the spiritual understanding and definiteness which always accompanies the recognition of the one divine identity or the infinite rule of soul. Immediately the feet of the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant touched the waters were cut off. The book of Revelation indicates that all men are kings and priests under God, and exact spiritual understanding of the divine nature will inevitably enable every man to inherit those offices, not literally, but mentally and spiritually. As soon as such an understanding, embracing the fundamentals of a divine calculus or process of spiritual reasoning, the ark and its contents, but touches any human problem that has to be solved, the solution becomes definite, and the divine way clear-cut. Then one only has to stand firm until the whole situation is clean passed over, to use the biblical terminology. If these spiritual and scientific illustrations were not meant to be understood and used practically by the individuals throughout all ages, of what avail would they be in the process of universal salvation? However, if these illustrations are spiritual and scientific, they are not things of yesterday or tomorrow, but of the eternal now of reality, and they are essentially universal. The two memorials of the crossing. After the crossing of Jordan, Joshua was told to erect two memorials of this event. He was first commanded to take 12 men of the people, a man from every tribe, each of whom was to take a stone out of the midst of Jordan, out of the place where the priest's feet stood firm, and carry it over, leaving it in the lodging place where they would lodge that night. They were to carry on their shoulders these 12 stones, even as the high priest had 12 precious stones on his breastplate. May not this signify that when we have mentally and spiritually stood firm in some situation, and proved the divine government and power as symbolized by the 12, we cannot rest on our laurels, but must carry our proof of spiritual power still further? In fact, we often find that we need to be reminded of the importance of spiritual power more when things are running smoothly than in the wilderness. How frequently is this true of nations, as well as of individuals? They stand firm in the darkest hours, but prosperity and success tempt them to neglect that which enabled them to stand firm, which was often a great measure of unselfishness, cooperation, moral courage, and a degree of spiritual conviction. These 12 stones were to be a memorial forever, and so they will be to us, if we acquaint ourselves with the essential nature of God as life or Father, as truth or Son, and as love or Mother, and constantly prove this essential nature in its infinitude through a divine calculus of the Word, the Christ, Christianity, and science. Thus the 12 stones are an eternal symbol of the infinite system of pure spiritual and scientific metaphysics, forever available to all mankind. The second memorial was that Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests which bear the Ark of the Covenant stood. And they are up there unto this day. Joshua 4:9. They are eternal. As soon as these stones were set up, and the priests had come out of the midst of Jordan, it is recorded that the waters of Jordan returned unto their place, and flowed over all his banks as they did before. Joshua 4:18 surely illustrates that any specific proof of spiritual power which is experienced as a result of using the calculus of divine ideas must always remain a landmark in spiritual progress, though again progress can never stop at that point. There is no final revelation of truth, individually or collectively, or the infinite would not be infinite. Jesus, in his life work, established many such landmarks, illustrating the irresistible development of the divine calculus of ideas. And although it may seem that in many cases the waters of materialism have temporarily hidden their significance, they remain to this day for spiritual sense to rediscover and use. The record of the passage of Jordan ends as follows: And he, Joshua, spake unto the children of Israel, saying, When your children shall ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What mean these stones? Then ye shall let your children know, saying, Israel came over this Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of Jordan from before you, until they were passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up from before us, until they were gone over, that all the people of the earth might know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that ye might fear the Lord your God for ever. Joshua 4:21-24. And so the children of Israel passed over Jordan and entered the promised land, where they had to take the city of Jericho, whose walls they were told to compass 7 times before it would finally fall. Thus the perfect and exact symbolism of the divine system is used in ever-increasing detail. The crossing of the Jordan today. The world of today is seeking to enter into the promised land of peace and safety. To do this as individuals and collectively, we must cross Jordan, and the Jordan of today is more difficult to cross than the Jordan of 3,000 years ago, because today the flooded waters of human thought are running in more definite and fixed channels. But we must not forget that the calculus of reality with which we can meet and cross this Jordan has now expanded in spiritual thought and desire, so that we are no longer only aware of the Word and the Christ, but we have also seen and felt the power of Christianity, the universal proof of the Christ idea, which Jesus established and demonstrated, and we are becoming aware, in some measure, of the spirit of truth, divine and absolute science, as foretold by Christ Jesus. When we remember that these scriptural records were edited and re-edited for centuries by some of the world's greatest thinkers and spiritual seers, it is not remarkable that they contain such exquisite and accurate detail in their symbolization of the manifold categories of the divine idea. As we understand these inspired symbols of the Bible, no longer shall we question whether faint and vague Hebrew history can really bring salvation, but we shall recognize in the Bible record the constant and ordered development of that spiritual and metaphysical system of divine idealism, which was exactly symbolized by the Hebrew prophets during many centuries, fully proved by Christ Jesus, and which is being brought to a climax today in our scientific age as spiritual science.